So this is it, everyone. This is our last official working artist seminar as part of the Poet Artist Development Program for the 2021-2022 program year. All of the workshops that we've done up to this point that are focused on these specific skills to being a working artist, they will be offered again in the future, maybe with updated information. But once we finish with this month, the month of May, for the rest of the summer, June, July, and into August, we'll be primarily focusing on developing your manuscripts and preparing your work to be potentially published. But in the vein of publishing and all of the other things that go along with that, today's session is focused on publishing, contracts, and commissions. Really kind of like the basic framework that you need to know as an artist for becoming a published working artist. Now, of course, for anyone watching on YouTube, if this is your first time coming to our channel, seeing some of our videos, welcome. And Distil Arts, DSTL Arts, is a nonprofit arts mentorship organization that inspires, teaches, and hires emerging artists from underserved communities. My name is Luis Antonio Pichardo, and I'm the founder and executive director of Distil Arts. And I'm joined today as a co-presenter, our master teaching artist, Abraham Jaramillo, who will introduce himself shortly. But basically, to give you a quick rundown of Distil Arts, DSTL does stand for something. It stands for Develop Skills and Transcend Limits Through the Arts, hence Distil Arts. Our programs, which begin with our Poet Artist Development Program, really are designed to support emerging artists in their advancement as emerging artists into the world of becoming working artists. We also offer our Conchas y Café bilingual community writing workshops, which is done 3 times a year for a course of 12 weeks. Every trimester does culminate with the publishing of a new zine called Conchas y Café Zine. And we also produce 2 other zines, including Art Block Zine, which is our love letter to LA, and that is published twice a year, and also Artistic Zine, which is specifically designed to showcase the artworks and experiences of autistic individuals. People on the spectrum are welcome from across the nation. They are welcome to submit to Artistic Zine. And the majority of our programs always begin with a quote. Today's quote comes from Ava DuVernay. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I hear it pronounced a couple of different ways, but for those of you that aren't familiar with Ava DuVernay, she is an American filmmaker, television producer, and film publicist. Also, the first Black woman to direct major films for Disney, first one to be nominated for an Oscar. She is a lot of firsts for Black women in the film industry. So definitely a very important figure in contemporary film and society in general. But Ava DuVernay is quoted as saying, all the traditional models for doing things are collapsing, from music to publishing to film. And it's a wide open door for people who are creative to do what they need to do without having institutions block their art. What does this quote mean for you, our participants? What does that say to you in your understanding of Ava DuVernay's quote? And it is in the chat, if in case you need to read it one more time. Abraham?
Well, definitely speaks of our time. I don't know when this person wrote it, but definitely speaks of today's time because of the social media platforms or even the variety of like services like Netflix, Hulu, Disney. There are more opportunities for people to expand their like art to those places without having to let's say to move to their basically the only place they used to sell movies or music, like these disco places. Like now they can just stream it themselves even, so they have that chance to do whatever they want and see what the public likes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like how Karen is saying, there are fewer gatekeepers right? Technology has allowed for a lot of things to become more open to the public, to the general public. Um, Also, I like what Mojda says. There's more responsibility and less excuses. I could definitely agree with that. Ani, you raised your hand as well.
I was actually struck by this the last week when I was kind of looking at my website and looking at new platforms, looking at what's available now for artists, for musicians in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the landscape is different now even than it was 5 years ago. The um, and it's been continually changing, but it
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely, it's not just that. For example, there was some social media when I was first starting out.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously not the way as widespread as it is now and used by so many people and so many different platforms.
Mm-hmm.
But even like we were very dependent, our generation, on radio to tell us what music was.
Yeah.
And so record labels had the monopoly on that. Now this new generation, they very much have access to music of all different kinds of genres, all
Mm-hmm.
from all over the world. And they're much more, I don't know, it's very interesting to see how eclectic their tastes are. So
Mm-hmm.
the users have more access and the artists have more ways now to be there. iTunes, you had to have a record label behind you if you wanted to be on iTunes. Not so much today. Now there are opportunities and ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really it's unbelievable how things kind of just exploded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, Abraham, at least in the realm of music, Abraham is right. It started with Napster, which was a digital file sharing platform. So that does show, right, like that technology does evolve in forces industries to evolve and change and adapt. Nikolai, you raised your hand as well.
Yeah, I agree with the stuff Karen was saying in the chat,
Mm-hmm.
especially around technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just look at how we're meeting today.
Yeah.
We're not dependent on signing up for an expensive class and going to UCLA after work or USC or something. Like, we can meet from our own home, and this has given us the opportunity to, be on par with other people who have better means.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to think that the classes that we teach, and the way that we teach them does at least honor your knowledge and your awareness, and it meets you where you're at. I like to believe that, but at the same time, just given my background in writing and art and everything, I want to also have it be something that is at least on par with most academic programs. There's no reason why someone who maybe can't afford to go to USC's PhD in poetry program, there's no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to have access to the same information. There's just no reason at all for that. um, and yeah, I really think that that's where Ava DuVernay's quote is kind of heading towards. um, but it's also on you, right? It's also on the individual to a certain degree to find resources like this, and it's also on you to really create. you know there is no excuse for that either. So there's I think certainly a little bit of everything within this conversation. The individual and the gatekeepers and all of us, right? We're all sort of play our roles in all of that. So you know on the idea of the gatekeeper, though, and where institutions are kind of starting to break down, and the traditional models, right? We do have a story for you, so it's story time. Abraham is going to tell us a quick story, but before he does, I do want to say that this does come from the Planet Money podcast.
Yes.
And if you're interested in hearing the full length podcast, The website is here on the screen now, and you will be getting the website along with this whole handout that I created, once it's uploaded to Google Classroom. So with that, I hand it off to Abraham Jaramillo.
Luis, quick one. Can I share my screen? Yeah, I think that will work better.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
it's a story time. Let me know you guys can see, because I know people. Yeah, can you guys see? I need feedback on this. Otherwise, I'll just
Yeah, it looks
keep on
pretty
reading.
good.
Pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can use a
So-
little bit.
Okay, Olivia, about that.
That's
That work?
that's fine.
Just in case.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. So this little story starts with David Joda Simon. He was a police reporter at the Baltimore Sun from 1982 till 1995. And after he wrote his first book, Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, 1991, he gets an agent who tells him, there's a good shot this could sell in Hollywood. So his agent teams up with another agent at one of the biggest companies in the entertainment industry, Creative Artists Agency, CAA. Eventually, David hears that a big A-list director wants the rights to his book, who made an offer to turn his book into an NBC TV series. Still, David talked to more people and found that it was a lowball deal. And after some more negotiations, he got a little more money. Deal was made, and the show runs for 7 seasons. Years later, David learns how to write for TV and wanted more than getting the rights for the book. So he planned to basically run his new project called The Wire. So David got a new agent from the same agency to handle his new TV deal. So before we continue the story, an agent manages David's deal in exchange for a commission, usually around 10%. So the agent's incentive is to be on David's corner, negotiating as big or high a fee as possible. Okay, now that out of the way, let's continue. One day during the negotiation, David hears from his agent that there is a different financial model, not commission, but something called packaging. So here it is. Packaging is when an agent negotiates several of his or her clients, writers, directors, actors, etc., and presents them to a studio in a bundle. And David will not have to pay the 10% commission, because instead the agent will get his or her money from the studio and a percentage from the profits. But also David learns that no matter what he as a writer gets from the deal, the agent still gets the same fee. So David said, wait a minute, then my agent has no reason to get me any more money. David later learns that not only he was being packaged in this new deal, but also that he had been packaged on the first deal, Homicide, and that the director who bought the rights for his book back then was in the same package, meaning his agent was representing both sides. David was, as you might expect, angry. But his current agent assured him that he had nothing to do with the first deal and that he would never be packaged again, and that it was the way things were done. David ended up staying, yet years later, him and many other writers saw how packaging was getting bigger and bigger and screwing them until on April 2008, 7,000 screenwriters across the country fired their agents. This is called the nuclear option. And again, this is from part of the podcast, Planet Money, and the link is on the chat. And I'm done with sharing this one.
So, as you can imagine, right? There's obviously a conflict there between having the agent representing the artist and also representing the director. In this case, a really kind of like the other gatekeeper for creating a film. So with this kind of thing happening often, it did end up, having a larger sort of impact on the way that the industry works. And this was, I think, in 2008, right, Abraham? When
Yes,
the
and
Yeah,
again, it's part of what we're talking about. Like, if, I mean, I know we need people probably in bigger deals to help us navigate through this business world of art, right?
yeah,
But also we have to understand it. Otherwise, people's gonna take advantage of us. Like in his case, even though he was smart, he first managed to get more money because at the beginning they were trying to screw him over. But he said because he's from someplace out of the states or whatever, he was already suspicious of a lot of people already. So
right.
he did the best he could, but still, the more we know, the better we can defend or basically help our cause because
Yeah.
people stop to take advantage of you regardless.
Right, and it does go back kind of to what we were saying before, that there's still um no excuse for you advocating on for yourself, right? You could have an agent and you can have, the means, right, to I don't know, have representation within the field, but you still need to know, right, what are the basic things that you want to look for in a contract? What are the basic things that you can do to protect your work? Because that's really what it comes down to, is you being the one to protect your work. And we'll get into that definitely a bit more. But again, as Abraham said, this comes from the Planet Money podcast. Apparently, there was a problem with the link in the chat, but the link is here on my screen now. If it works, hopefully, when you get the handout from the download off of Google Classroom, you can listen to it. Otherwise, you could just simply look for the Planet Money podcast, and the episode is, I think, called "The Writer's Revolt," as Abraham said before. But agents and unions, these are two things that obviously played a big role in the writers' strike. For back in 2008, in the late 2000s. And this is something that you may be interested in and you may want to at least know about. So this is for when you need people, right? When people can call each other's people. But really, the basic idea is that both an agent and also a union are there to protect the rights of the worker, and to offer representation. Now, there is some overlap, right? You could be in a union and not have an agent, or you can have an agent and not be in a union. Ultimately, what they both offer is professional connections, right, and opportunities. The idea of representation of you as the talent means that an agent is there to sell your skills, your talent, and your artwork on your behalf as much as they can. Remember, an agent's incentive is in getting you a commission, a contract, in order for them to get a commission. A union, it's different, right? Union representation is really about collective bargaining and using the union as a way to leverage an equitable amount of pay, plus other benefits and things like that. But either way, it is about having someone representing you and protecting you and your best interests. They're also going to be available to explain contracts to you, and hopefully negotiate contracts as well. Some unions do offer that as a service, as part of your membership dues. You can ask them to review a contract for you with volunteer lawyers that are part of the union, and then help get help with negotiating either a better contract, a better deal, a better commission, a better royalty, whatever the case might be. Um, they also obviously act as liaisons with attorneys. An agent is not a legal professional. You need to be clear about that. An agent can give you advice on what they think works for you, but in the end, their legal advice is not actual legal advice. Only an attorney that has an active, uh, license or credential to be an attorney can give you actual legal advice. So most of the time, agents will defer to an attorney, and that's a good way for you to at least have someone in your corner. Of course, a union is going to work with volunteer attorneys, or they're going to have attorneys that are not working for the agent, and to have that comparison, right? They're working for you, the union member. So at least with a union, you can be assured that the attorney is not going to uh, have their connection or whatever commission they may be paying as a retainer to the agent kind of get in the way of you getting the best deal as possible. Um, they'll also liaison with specialists, meaning that they're going to refer you to someone else when it comes to developing your brand identity, developing a website. They're not going to do these kinds of things for you. Unions might do it through special discounts. An agent might do it through a direct referral. So it just sort of depends on whatever the agency or the union has as an additional benefit to you, the person ultimately receiving these services. When you're looking for an agent, based on the limited research that we did, there are things that you want to consider. One of them, obviously, being the fact that most agents should not charge you up front. Their incentive is in getting you a deal. So if they like you and they feel like they can represent you, they'll take a commission from whatever contract you get, whether it be 10 to 15% of whatever that contract is. That tends to be like an industry standard between 10 and 15%. If they're going to charge you like a reading fee, to read a manuscript in advance, they're probably not a legitimate agent. And I'll give you some resources for searching for that. Sounds like there was a question or a comment. Abraham?
So that also means the agents are going to be picky of who they choose because
Right.
they may want to get the money as well, right?
Exactly. Theoretically, an agent should be kind of picky about who they choose, just like you should be picky about who you choose. That's why it's good to research who else they represent. Because if they have other artists whose work is similar to yours, or another writer who has maybe a similar background, that agent might have a better understanding of how to sell that work that you're trying to sell. If it's like, in the 80s, it was very popular all of a sudden for movie studios to make films about the Chicano experience. That's why you had a lot of movies in the late 80s, early 90s about, the typical Mexican American family. Thinking of things like American Me, Stand and Deliver. There's a lot of movies that came out around that time period that are all sort of the same type. Um, and that's because those agents that represented those writers, were capitalizing on the experience, on, this sudden trend in film, right, to represent these stories. So, you want to look at not only, the other artists that are being represented by this agent, but also, who they've sold these properties to. If there's obviously, a movie that is similar, that is done by the same movie studio, or if, like, let's say Netflix is doing, a film series about, I don't know, the Armenian genocide, let's say, right? And then you also have Hulu doing one at the same time. There may be an agent that's involved that's actually playing both studios, and having multiple writers that represent that story might be to your benefit, to be a part of that team. Um, you don't want to necessarily think of it in terms of your competition in this context. This is just a way to say that, an agent might be better suited for representing your story because they know how to articulate your story, to whoever it is that they're pitching your work to. It's also really important to understand the financial and contractual obligations. You know, some agents may want to only work with you and that's it. They don't want anyone else working with you. And if that's the case, you may be limiting your opportunities outside of that agent's specialty. If it's a literary agent that only deals with books, but they, for whatever reason, are only looking to work with you within all of the areas like film, TV, sound, audio, right? Like that could be a red flag. Also, if they're making you sign contracts that say that you won't compete by, I don't know, releasing a board game at some point with your artwork, that could be an issue, right? Because that could limit your ability to merchandise and to sell licenses in other mediums. So, be very clear about those things and ask those questions when looking for an agent. Because, like I said before, it really comes down to your ability to license your work. Your work can be used in more than one way. Again, if you want to learn more about literary agents specifically, Poets and Writers, that's a magazine and also a very, very good website that you might want to look into. This first link gives you a better explanation of what literary agents do. And they also have a database, pw.org/literary_agents. That database has a listing of active literary agents and also the type of work that they actually represent. So, two very good resources on the same website. One thing to note, especially for those of us that are poets, most literary agents do not represent poets because poetry book sales are not very high. Poetry books actually sell the least in the literary world, so a lot of times agents won't even consider you if you're a poet, only a poet. Of course, if you're doing other forms of writing, then they'll probably still give you a chance. But with poetry, you can pretty much create a book and represent yourself in those particular instances. Um, but it is something to obviously be aware of. Now, remember, a union is all about power in numbers, right? Collective bargaining, collective strength. Unions are incentivized by having a set of productive members, right? People that are actually working and who can pay their dues. That's ultimately the incentive of a union, is to have people pay their dues. But really, what that means is that they have to be there to protect you, in a lot of different situations, and also to help you get jobs so that you can continue to pay those dues. Some of the benefits of being a union member do include things like having minimum salary requirements within your contracts. They help to protect your intellectual property, making sure that you get credit for your work and also, the ability to license it beyond whatever it is that you were originally creating the work for. Residuals or royalties is another way to think about that. They're there to help make sure that those things are part of your contracts. Unions also provide, in some cases, help with researching or getting discounts on certain kinds of medical insurance, dental or vision insurance, that kind of thing. And some of them even help with setting up pension plans and providing legal and career advice. Another thing to kind of keep in mind, though, is that some unions do have eligibility requirements. Some of them might be more specific to screenwriters. Some of them might be more specific to, the producers or directors. Some of them might be just for musicians. There's the freelancers union, which is specifically for people who are freelancers. So there's different types of unions, and some of them do have their restrictions. And of course, you have to consider the cost of joining. Every union is going to have dues and different membership structures. So, if you're just starting off, there might be a discount program. If you're a union member that has been around for a while and is making enough money, to have a decent living at it, you might be paying a little bit more. So there's obviously that element to it. And in the research, Abraham pointed out that there's a potential, right, that you might not get jobs because they're not hiring union members. But the truth is that if you're a union member, you're doing it because you already have an idea of the benefits of it. So you're probably not going to be going after opportunities that are, non-union member specific, or, you know, places that aren't going to be hiring union members. So that might not necessarily be a big deal for you, but it is something to be aware of, I suppose. Now, we did, like I said, do a little bit of research, and on our limited research, we were able to find two unions that are specific for writers that you might be, interested in looking at, primarily as writers and as illustrators. The first one is the National Writers Union, nwu.org is their website. And they basically cover or protect writers working in print, electronic, and multimedia. And it is also open to freelancers and employed professionals. So you don't have to have a job with like a movie studio. You can also be a freelance writer doing, say, like, you know, freelance journalism, or, blogger, that kind of thing. And this does include also academic writers, people that write content for apps or for websites, online mediums. There's a lot of different ways in which they consider a writer to be a writer, including poets, which I thought was kind of cool. Poets and playwrights, and also self-published authors too. So you don't have to be published through a major publisher. You can also be self-published and be covered by this particular union. Some of the benefits include things like medical, dental, and vision insurance coverages, or help with finding one that works for you. They also offer free press passes, and a press pass is especially important if you're going to be any form of a journalist, whether that be as a vlogger, a person that is doing video blogs, or as a blogger, if you're doing only written blogs. Of course, if you're also a freelance journalist, this is also a very good tool to have. They also offer legal and career advice through attorneys that work with them as volunteers. Plus, they also help you with contract grievances. So if there is ever a contract that is broken, or maybe not lived up to on behalf of the person that hired you, this particular union will help you through the entire process to ensure that you are protected and paid for your work. Plus, they also offer travel and promotion assistance. So, most publishers won't pay for a book tour, but this particular group will help you with finding resources to cover some of the expenses for going on a book tour. And I noticed that they have monthly dues, so you pay every month. You don't have a yearly option. And they also have a sliding scale structure. So that means that if you're making less than $5,000 a year off of your writing, you actually pay only $12.50 a month. And it goes up depending on how much you make a year off of your writing. The second one that we found was also the Authors Guild, very similar. And this one specifically is open to traditionally published authors and illustrators with at least one published book in the US, and also self-published authors who earn less than $5,000 a year in the past 18 months. And freelance writers who have published at least 3 pieces or made $5,000 or less in the past 18 months. So very similar, but slightly different ways in which they calculate eligibility. Very similar things that they offer as well. They don't offer press passes, but they do offer what's called media liability insurance, which is insurance that you would use in the event that you are, recording media or anything like that in a public setting. They also offer contract reviews, just like the other one. This one does offer exclusive discounts that aren't available to the average writer, and a few other different things as well. This one has 2 different types of memberships. They have the regular membership, which starts off at $135 a year or $12 a month. And they also have one for emerging writers, which is limited in terms of the benefits that you get, and it's only for people that have not been published yet. It's $100 annually, so you do get a discount, and you also get that $9 a month if you prefer to pay every month. Again, this handout is going to be uploaded to the Google Class, so you'll have access to the websites and all this information. Another thing to think about, though, is membership and trade organizations. These memberships or trade organizations, they're not necessarily unions, but they're usually advocacy groups. So these are going to be groups that might offer things like professional development seminars that are free to their members. They might offer, discounts on certain things, but more than anything, they're an advocacy group. So they're going to be going to, politicians either at the local, state, or national level, and they're going to be telling them, why it's important to support the arts. Some examples of these types of trade organizations or membership organizations include the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which most of us know as the Oscars. They're the ones that actually put together the ceremony for the Oscars, and only members get to be nominated for the Oscars. But if you are at any point working in the film industry, and you have someone that can sponsor you to become a member, this could be a benefit in terms of the networking potential. There's also things like the Academy of American Poets, which is a national organization that maintains the poets.org website. They usually do things like materials for workshops, a registry of poems and poets, and they also have different like monthly or annual programs that they offer in terms of like seminars and discussions, panel discussions with poets and writers and that kind of thing. And there's also a local one called Arts for LA. So Arts for LA is an advocacy organization more than anything. They really do work with the city council here in LA to ensure that the arts and artists are represented in the budgets. And also they offer different professional development opportunities, especially for people that are just starting off as either artists or as arts administrators. So, I definitely suggest you take a look at them. If anything, it's free to sign up for their newsletters. They do often send out information about upcoming grants and other funding opportunities that are available to artists. Regardless of whether you decide that you want to join a union or have an agent, it's really important to remember that when it really comes down to it is networking and having a community that you're a part of. So whether that's us here at Distil Arts or a trade organization, a union, you want to have your group of people that you can refer to, whether that be for editing a manuscript or for sharing resources or just kind of having community. It's really important that you feel like you're part of a network, because you never know what kind of resources and connections you're going to have with anyone that you might network with. And I hear a question or comment. Hey,
Well, yeah, it's what I was telling you, Luis. Like, sorry, let me throw my AC. Yeah, like for example, the Oscars or other organizations, maybe they would not offer a lot of stuff legally or economically, but that's a huge benefit for some of those ones. And I think the biggest one is prestige, because if you put in your resume that you coming from this organization, it's definitely going to open many doors. So just be aware of those things that might not be accountable like in numbers of money directly, but indirectly, they're huge.
Yeah, affiliations, right? When you put that on a resume, the people that you're affiliated with or the groups that you're affiliated with, depending on how well known they are, it could have a pull, right? It could mean that it does give you access to other groups and other people that you may not have otherwise had access to. In some ways it is about gatekeeping, but ultimately when it comes to unions especially, they're there to really protect you. They're there to have, so that you feel like you have your back covered in the event of some sort of financial or legal problem that could arise from selling your artwork. And this doesn't include this. It doesn't, isn't it's not just limited to writers. A lot of these things are open to also illustrators, children's book authors, comic book writers, people that are maybe creating music or doing spoken word tracks. Unions like these exist because there's definitely a need for them. um, Graphic designers, like I said, the freelancers union is one that's specifically for photographers and graphic designers. And they provide you with templates for contracts. They provide you with templates for work for hire contracts specifically. So there's definitely benefits to being part of some form of a trade organization, membership organization, or a union. And again, the agent, like we talked about earlier, you could go with an agent or you could not go with an agent. It really just depends on where you want to direct your efforts. So, are there any questions so far? Is everybody kind of feeling good? Yeah. All right. So let's continue on. So, publishers versus self-publishing. This is one of those things that, at least in the realm of Distil Arts, I always make it as an option, right? You can always, submit your manuscript to me and Abraham, and we'll look at it and we can either publish it through Distil Arts, or if you choose, you can publish it on your own or send it off to another publisher. There's a lot of small presses that do often take manuscripts for consideration. Um, but like Ava DuVernay's quote said at the beginning, all these old and traditional ways of doing things, they're breaking excuse me, they're breaking down. They're not necessarily the same as they used to be. There are not as many barriers to getting your work into the hands of your audience as there used to be. Working with a publisher, though, does have its benefits to some level. One of the benefits could be editorial guidance and copy editing. you know no one is perfect. We all write in our own style, in our own way, but sometimes we'll misspell a word, or we'll use some sort of funky grammar, or especially if we're writing things that are based on actual facts, there might be omissions or false things that we're saying in our writing, and we need a fact checker. So a publisher, because they are trying to ultimately protect their reputation as a publisher, they're going to invest a lot of money in making sure that your work is editorially sound, right? They don't want to see any mistakes. They don't want to see any kind of omissions. And they definitely don't want to see anything that gets them into trouble because of either omission or because of a misinformation. Another thing about a publisher is that they're going to take care of every level, every component of designing your books, designing, printing, shipping, and distribution. Everything, the whole shebang. Um, what that means is that you're going to get cut out of it. If you don't like the cover of your book, too bad. But at least you're not the one that's paying for the cost of the printer, for the cost of the shipping to all of the thousands of books and bookstores, libraries, all of that stuff. They're the ones that are taking on that cost. Um, you know, that said, you might want to have a little bit of more control if you want to do that, in the self-publishing way. But you know, obviously, going with a larger publisher does have its benefits, especially when we're talking about distribution. Um, you don't have to worry about doing direct sales too much. Uh, Everything is done on your behalf, and you just collect the money. There's also a certain level of marketing support that you might get from a publisher, and that's not always 100%. You could potentially just have only the book printed, and that's about it. Plus maybe a mention in a press release, along with all the other hundreds of books that were published by that publisher that month. But there's a possibility that you could, depending on the style of the book, the content of the book, a publisher might invest a little bit of money in advertisements. They might invest a little bit of money in special, unique placement inside of a bookstore like Barnes and Noble. There's a reason why certain books get placed right at the front, right at the door, with the big cutout, that says the name of the book, or a big poster. It's because a publisher pays for that space. So there is some level of marketing support that you would get if you work with a publisher. But things like social media promotion, book tours, all of that's pretty much falls on you, the author. But again, there are certain benefits to working with larger, more established publishers. Now, self-publishing, on the other hand, when you do it yourself, more and more organizations and other authors are looking at it as a very viable way of doing things. They see it now as more of a credible way of publishing. Um, this also allows for a lot more creativity. As a person that does self-publishing, I am the one that's doing all of the copy editing. I'm the one that's doing all of the designing and proofing and all of the shipping and the distribution. There's a lot of things that I take on my own. There are things that if I had a bigger publishing company that I might get help with. But that said, I have now also more flexibility. I can do unique, short, limited run books, and these what are typically known as like designer books or boutique books, or uh, fine art press books. They become more like a collector's item, and they can then be priced at a higher profit margin. So because they're done by hand or because they're just so unique and limited, there's like a collectability to them that makes people more excited about buying them and more willing to make more money. Another thing too about self-publishing is that you ultimately end up owning all of the rights to everything. You have the copyright of the book design, you have the copyright of the book cover and the imagery that goes on the cover. You obviously have the copyright on the content inside of the book, every poem, every short story, whatever the case might be. You own every single component of it. You're not licensing it to anyone else. So there's a benefit to that, because then you can turn around and sell licenses to other media outlets. It's a lot easier for the contract to come to you from, like, say, Nickelodeon, and they could license your writing to turn it into an animated series. You could much easier license your images to a toy maker, and have toys made out of the main characters in your drama or whatever the case might be. So there's definitely a benefit to that component of it. Um, Plus, you also have the ability to really customize your marketing strategy. Um, where a publisher might just simply give you like a corner in a Barnes and Noble that they'll pay for, you as a self-publisher, you can do all sorts of things like your book tour. You can also um, do specialty arrangements with smaller independent bookstores that maybe become like a recurring event. You can do special promotions where you're giving away the book through social media, uh, you know, and you won't be really running the risk of breaking any kind of rules within your contract that you would potentially have if you were working with a larger publisher, because sometimes they do make certain limitations to what you're able to do in terms of promotion, um, because they don't want to be seen in a more like cheapened or negative light based on how you might want to approach the marketing of your book. So there's obviously that benefit of self-publishing. And I mentioned it already a couple of times, and this is something that we've already talked about in several other presentations, but the difference between a copyright and a trademark is very important to understand. A copyright, it protects the rights of the person who creates any kind of artistic, literary, musical, dramatical, or other kinds of intellectual works. These things are exclusive to the person that actually creates it, the author, as they're called, right? And the copyright, when it is registered, at least here in the United States, the copyright lasts for the entire lifetime of the artist plus 70 years. And this is only relevant if you are copyrighting something as an individual. If you are a corporation like a publisher who is filing for a copyright, the corporation can only hold a copyright for 20 years, if I remember correctly. It's either 20 or 25 years. After that period, their copyright will expire and they no longer have the ability to, really reproduce the artwork in its original form. At that point, they have to relicense the work. They have to either, redo it, like kind of do like a reboot and then start it all over again, or they have to go back to the original author, the original holder of the copyright, and purchase the license again, sometimes for a bigger amount. So that's how that typically works with corporations. Copyrights also extend to anything that can be printed, performed, or displayed. So films, dance routines, plays, poems, photographs, all of that type of stuff. And that it does include also digital media, and websites. And again, a copyright is not something that you would necessarily uh, get automatically. You do have to register it with the Library of Congress, or at least the U.S. Copyright Office, I mean. And then the Library of Congress is like an optional additional step. But once it's registered, you can either sell your rights or you can license your rights on a temporary basis, depending on how you set up your contracts. To learn more about copywriting, you go to the copyright.gov website. Trademarking is specific to a company's name, logo, slogan, or products. Those things can be trademarked. It's not the same as a copyright. A trademark is basically designed to protect the consumer from having like a mix up between brands. One brand, one company, one organization cannot use similar work that looks like, sounds like, feels like the work of another trademarked brand. So that's really more about consumer protections than anything. Are there any questions about that? Unless they are Disney, yeah. No? All right. So moving on, thinking about licensing terms and agreements, these are things that are really important for you to understand, right? There's different ways in which works can be licensed. Licensing is really the main one that you would most likely be working within, right? Licensing your work controls the how, the when, the where, and the how long other people can use your artwork. This is typically going to be done through some sort of an agreement or a contract. The contract will typically say, something along the lines of the work that is being produced by the artist is going to be used for X, Y, and Z purposes for X amount of years at the residual or royalty rate of Y. So, those are going to be some of the things that you'll want to see in a licensing agreement. Typically, they will state on there that you own the copyright to your work. Again, it's a license that another entity is purchasing. They're not purchasing your artwork. That would be a different type of contract. However, that said, again, like I said before, a publisher can own the copyright to any work that they create where your work is licensed. So, if a publisher chooses, they can copyright the book that they published featuring your artwork, and they license the artwork from you. That's how they end up, ultimately registering the work so that no other business or entity can copy, like, say, the book cover or the book design, the printing method. Those kinds of things are what are copywritten, but the content, the stuff that's inside of the book, the stuff that we as an audience read, that still belongs to the author. And the author is obviously given credit, and they receive a residual payment or a royalty payment because of the work being licensed to the publisher. It's never or rarely that a publisher will own the rights in their entirety for the creative work. Legitimate license agreements, like I said here, it sets a limit to how it can be used, it also sets the terms for payment. So, it'll say you'll get paid in either euros or you'll get paid in dollars. You'll get paid bi-monthly. You'll get paid every quarter. It sets those kinds of terms and it says how you're going to get paid. And they'll typically have what's called an escape clause, or at least it should have one. Because if something goes wrong and they no longer want to publish your work because of a backlash or something like that, they'll want to invoke an escape clause. Same goes for you. If you find out that this publisher is publishing work that is controversial or that goes against your personal values and beliefs, if you have an escape clause, you can say, I no longer want you to touch my work. You're no longer going to benefit from my work in your possession. So, those are really important things to look for in a licensing agreement. On the other hand, there's the work for hire contracts. And the work for hire is typically for short term commercial work. This might be like a brand, like, say, Nike, hiring a photographer like Abraham to, photograph their models. And so it's a work for hire contract. They're more than likely going to pay Abraham a certain amount of money for the digital negatives in this particular case. They're going to use the work as they see fit. And whatever the payment terms were with the artist, that's all that artist gets. They don't get any kind of royalties more often than not in a work for hire contract. It's just you get paid X amount for X service and that's it. Most of the time they're going to be at will. So if you're not performing, or if they are somehow making it difficult for you to perform, you can typically break the contract and that's it. No penalties, nothing like that. Unless if it is written into the contract in that way. But more often than not, it's just considered at will. It's just like getting hired by any other employer. But it's also important to remember that all the intellectual property rights usually will belong to the hiring company or individual. So the artist that creates this creative work, they're not going to own the rights to the work. They're essentially selling the rights to whoever purchased it. That said, there's still usually an opportunity for the negotiation process for the artist to say, hey, I understand I can't use the work in any other mediums. I can't make merchandise off of that work, but if it's okay with you, if it's permissible within our contract, I would like to at least use it within my portfolio. And so that type of permission is usually granted to artists when they're in a work for hire contract. Because more than anything, aside from the exposure, it's good to show that you've been doing professional work. Another one to be aware of is Creative Commons. Creative Commons is a relatively new thing. I first learned about it about 15 years ago through Flickr, which was kind of like Instagram before Instagram. But Creative Commons is actually a nonprofit organization, and they specifically focus on digital copywriting and licensing. This is a way to ensure that when you post something online, you are getting the credit that you deserve as an artist. Uh, this also includes ways for other artists to get your work off of a website and either repost it, share it, or remix it and make it part of a new work of art. Um, this is specific to digital mediums, but that said, there are also Creative Commons copyrights or licenses that can be used on non digital or physical objects like books. They have different levels of public accessibility. There's like 3 levels. The first one where it's just open source, open to anyone, open to the public for anybody to use, remix, incorporate, etc., into their artwork. Then there's like a second level, which requires people to give, an acknowledgement of who the original artist was, and a certain level of like limitations on how people can use it. And then there's the most strict way, which is basically no one else can use it. Only the original artist or original poster can use the artwork, basically. But more importantly, this is designed to ensure that you are properly attributed if anyone ever decides to copy your work. It functions like in the way that a metadata tag might function in a digital file. You can learn more about Creative Commons by going to the creativecommons.org website. The last one that you might have heard before, and which I just used also, is open source. Right? And open source is specifically for software and source codes that are used to develop either an app or some sort of program, um, or other form of software that would be for public benefit, really. And it's made publicly available. So that's what open source usually refers to. There are different types of licenses that are open source licenses, and you can learn more about that on the opensource.org website as well. That might not be something that is all that important to you, but if in the future you decide to go more into the augmented reality or virtual reality environment, those are going to be things that you really want to be sure you investigate and hopefully use, to protect your artwork and your um, original copyright ultimately. Now, let's take a look at a publishing agreement in action. This right here is the Distil Arts publishing agreement. If you end up having your manuscript selected by me and Abraham to be published through Distil Arts, this is what I'm going to hand you. And, as you can see here, this is specifically for a trade paperback book, nothing else. No ebook, no audiobook, no use of this in a digital format. We are not licensing your work to, I don't know, make a CD, nothing like that. It's just that one format and nothing else. So that's going to be pretty typical of a license agreement. When you look at this, you're going to see that there are different sections. The first section is going to basically say, this is how you have to deliver your work, either as a Microsoft Word file or as a Google Doc file. If it's a manuscript that is like a comic book or a children's book, it's going to be, 300 ppi scanned images, in JPEG format. So it's going to be a little bit more detailed in terms of what the requirements are for you to turn in your work. And it's going to have some legal language in here. It says here things like the author artist grants the publisher exclusive rights to print, publish, distribute, sell, and license the rights to any and all editions or formats of the book. That means that you're giving us permission to, if we needed to or wanted to work with you on turning it into an ebook or, some sort of like a PDF formatted book, EPUB, something that works on the Kindle, whatever. But primarily, we're doing it in the trade paperback format. It also says here that this is limited for a 3-year period. So based on whenever you sign this, 3 years after you sign it, this ends and the book will no longer be available through Distil Arts. Everything reverts back to you, and then you can do whatever you like with your manuscript. You can do a second edition, you can do, an advanced version, whatever you want. There's a lot of different things that are included in this. We won't go through every single one, but it is important to see, that it is typical in a contract to have a time period and also a clause where it says that you can purchase the books at the cost from the publisher, basically at wholesale rather than retail. And there's no secondary rights or royalties that are paid back to the publisher for that. We assign the ISBN number right away. Here we have this whole thing about the cover art. So if you do not supply your own cover art, I will coordinate with you the creation of your cover art. If in case you decide to hire someone to create the cover art for you, you are responsible for creating a work for hire contract that doesn't conflict with this particular licensing agreement. That's not something that any average publisher would offer you. Also, once a book is published, there's no way to change it. So that is also a clause that you're going to find in this. If later on you say, oh, I made a mistake, and it's a pretty big one, there's just no going back. Once it's published, and that's it. And we're only assigning one ISBN number to any book. So there's that other thing too. This also right here gives you the payment terms. So you get a 50% royalty on all copies sold. Plus, you're given here the payment schedule. So it's a quarterly schedule, and most people are paid no later than the 15th day of the month after the quarter ends. And everything is done via direct deposit. Uh, Plus, you'll also get a breakdown of where the money came from, right? How many books were sold, and what that means in terms of your royalty. Uh, there's also this clause right here, which talks about that you are responsible for your taxes, not Distil Arts. So you have to be the one to do your own bookkeeping in that sense. And there's, like I said, a whole bunch of other things. Lastly, remember I said an escape clause? This right here is the escape clause. So if there's ever any kind of disagreement or anything like that, you're more than welcome to look at the Distil Arts accounting so you can see where the book sales are coming from. You're also welcome to let us know if you want to stop selling the book for whatever reason. You would just have to give us obviously enough time to do that. So there's definitely a lot of different things that are included in this kind of agreement, but it is ultimately a legally binding agreement. This is based off of other legally binding agreements that I've seen in the past, and that have been shared with me by other publishers. So, this is definitely something that I take seriously, because I want your work to really flourish, and I think that as long as you have kind of a basic understanding of what you're looking at here, and as long as you understand that in Distil Arts' case, we are only doing the book format, you can still use your work to pursue like a larger book deal. You can use your work to license it as a movie, TV show, an audio book. You can take it to any other publisher that could do an alternative format that isn't a trade paperback book. So that's that. Yes. Abraham.
Just wanted to mention, like DSTL Arts has a really open kind of contract. It's really fair and really it's allow options for the writer, unless like other publishers who are really really uptight to whatever decisions the writer wants to make.
Yep. Exactly. It is something that like when I created this, I created it because I really did want to support you as an artist, and I wanted to bring you along through the process of developing your book. So we're talking about from its brainstorm phase through to its execution phase, all the way through to the final printing and publishing, which is not something that you're going to uh, often get from any publisher. So it's just my way of teaching you ultimately. Thank you for the applause there, Abraham. All right. So in the event that you need to create a work for hire contract, be sure to include some of the following things. Payment terms. Just like I did in my contract for our artists, be sure that you really value the artist that you're hiring. Pay them equitably, pay them a good rate, something that is reasonable, given the circumstances, but be fair more than anything. We're all artists, we're all trying to make a living, so be fair. But do lay out the terms. If it's going to be a lump sum paid after they complete the work, then let it be that. If it's going to be paid in payments where they send you a copy of work in progress, you pay them a little bit, they keep on going, just be clear about how you're going to pay them and the amount that you're going to pay them. Also, the use terms. Again, most of the time, work for hire means that you are buying or you are being hired to create a commission that is unique to that particular person. or corporation or whatever the case might be. So because of its unique nature, you as the person contracting an artist, you probably don't want that work to be competing in another sphere. um, you don't want the artist maybe to be creating merchandise of something that is meant for you to create merchandise with. So those sort of like non-compete clauses are appropriate to have in a work for hire contract. But it's also fair to include in a contract some sort of clause, some sort of phrasing that says that they can use a version of the artwork that they created for their own portfolio. So that way they can continue to get work. You don't want to limit an artist's ability to get work at any point. So make sure that you do have that included in your work for hire contract. Also, design specifications and delivery method are really, really important. I can speak for myself as a graphic designer. If I'm not given the design specs for a commission, which have had happen before, it's super frustrating because I don't know how I'm supposed to create a piece of art for someone or a graphic design file. It's really, really frustrating. So, if you are hiring someone, let's say to create your book cover, the book cover image needs to be done a certain way. It needs to be something that I can scan. It needs to be sized in a correct size, for reproduction purposes. So, be sure to tell people when you hire them, how it is that you want them to deliver it, whether it's digital or physical. Tell them the size requirements, tell them the scanning requirements, tell them everything that you possibly can so that they don't basically waste their time or waste yours. Um, so, those are some basic things. Ultimately, I don't really have an example of a contract that you can use, but as long as you incorporate some of these things, if you just type it up on, say, a Word document and you say, bullet point this, bullet point that, that should be more than enough to be a legally binding document. As long as you sign it, they sign it, and everyone gets a copy. Again, in general, never sell your rights. Never give up your ability to make money off of your artwork. If you sell your artwork, keep in mind that you're not really selling it, you're licensing it. Especially if you're publishing it as a book or if you're, trying to create merchandise or something like that. There's other ways in which you can potentially earn money off of whatever it is that you're creating. Some of the use case scenarios that I listed here is things like film, TV, stage, and sound, right? People don't think of sound, but audiobooks, music, when your work is sampled, remixed, or interpolated into someone else's song, like in the case of Gustavo, who is very fortunate to have, uh, another musician want to incorporate his poetry into their music. That's a sound media. That is another way in which the licensing could bring money for someone like Gustavo. um Obviously movies and films, that's what a lot of that's really where most writers that are living in LA do make their money, because they're writing for studios and they're selling scripts and that kind of thing. But there's also things like TV shows or a TV series. It may not be that you're a writer on there, but it could be that you write a book and that book is popular enough to where some of the characters might be used in a spin-off show or in a series that is trying to reinterpret what you wrote in your book. Um, plays plays can sometimes be adapted from poems. It's not that uncommon for poetry to be featured inside of a play. So there's like definitely ways in which your work can be featured in other mediums. There's also the digital medium, right? When we think of digital, we don't always, go to every possible aspect of that, but that could include obviously videos, social media videos and posts like that. That could be something that a person could license, but even things like videograms. If you're not sure with what or I'm sorry, it's called a cinematograph or a videogram. A cinematograph is a motion. It's a still image with motion in it, or it could be like a GIF, right? A GIF is a file, like a visual file that repeats itself. So it's like a little video that's on loop. Those are things that you can actually license if you're creating them. Memes. Memes are almost always ripped off from something. And if it wasn't for the fact that there's things like Creative Commons, it could potentially turn out that you're losing money if your work becomes viral as a meme. Um, Augmented reality is a relatively new thing, so is virtual reality. But you can still make work that is somehow incorporated into virtual reality or augmented reality. The metaverse is a new thing, but I can guarantee you that 5 years from now, someone like Apple is going to find a way to really make that actually work for everyday people. And there's going to be a need for storytellers like you to create content that fits that environment. Print media is pretty straightforward. I mean, we're talking about books, we're talking about comics, but it could also be something as simple as like a pamphlet, newspaper. It could be a magazine or a zine. Flyers even could be a way in which you could license your work. There's a thing called Adobe Stock or Getty Images. These are places where people can go and get stock images. And if you're an illustrator or a photographer and you take photos of the sunset, you could actually sell those photos as a licensed product if you upload them to Getty Images, for example. So stock photography is technically a print media and a digital media. So there's definitely other ways in which your work could be represented or can be used to create something new. Coloring books, illustrators, coloring books. Such a simple way to make money off of something that you're already doing. Then there's toys and merchandise, dolls and action figures, play sets, stuffed animals. I could imagine some of David's little animals, like Pablo the penguin, could be turned into a stuffed animal. The penguin stuffed animals already exist. All it takes is maybe doing one small tweak, and there you go. You have a merchandise thing for Pablo's story. Desk supplies, writers and desk supplies. I mean, come on, that's like a given. But you could even include things like housewares, linens, um, you know, mugs, tumblers, like all sorts of different things that could have your work printed on them, and other kinds of lifestyle merchandise, yoga mats, backpacks, etc. So there's all sorts of ways in which you could actually license your work, without even really doing a ton. Some of these things are print on demand now. You can do them from the comfort of your own home. So I know that was a lot. I know there's a lot of things to consider, but one of the ways in which you can start is by doing the homework assignment. You can begin now by creating a list of ways in which you could and will license your work. Really think about other ways in which you can generate revenue to support yourself as an artist. And also begin thinking now about what are your minimum requirements for someone to license your work. If you know that your work is worth $25, like my poems should be when I do a personalized poem, then write it down. Actually, write it down, set it as a firm part of your business strategy. This is really ultimately what like every company does. Everyone has a bottom line, everyone needs to make a living. You know, you are no different as an artist, as a writer, as an illustrator, photographer, designer, whatever you may be. You are no different. You need to make a living. We all do. And it's really important that you be comfortable with saying, this is my requirement for you to use my artwork, my skills, my talent, my time, because your time is worth something. And I don't want you to ever forget that. So that's it for today's session. Obviously, we'll be around to answer some questions, but If any of you, especially those people watching on YouTube later, have any questions, you can always reach out to us. You can visit our website for, more information about our different programs. Follow us using at Distil Arts on all the major social media. And of course, you can reach out directly to either me or Abraham using our email addresses, luis@dstlarts.org or abraham@dstlarts.org as well. So, a lot of useful information. Stock photography? Yes, Tina. Stock photos. That's basic photography that you can borrow, we'll say, from a source such as Adobe Stock, Getty Images. They're just images that are kind of general, nothing very specific. If you think of like the images that you see of like people of different races and ethnicities wearing all like maybe a white button up shirt in a very general office building, that's probably a stock image.
They use it also for backgrounds or texture. I have a friend who has submitted a couple of their landscape photography.
Yeah.
That also texture like wood, or you want to put a desk, as long as it's not like cannot take a photo of something specific that's maybe brand or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And people basically pay for a service that says like you are allowed to take 5 pictures or 1 picture a month, or depending on the contract, like Adobe has.
Yeah.
It's ways still.
But yeah. And yeah, you actually can sell photos of the sunset. If it's a general enough photo, if there's nothing, in the photo that is specific to a brand, you can upload it to Getty Photos. You can upload it to Adobe Stock. There's so many other agencies out there that offer stock photography, Alamy. And if you upload it and the quality is good enough and people want to use it, you'll get a royalty payment. So, yeah. Any questions? Like I said, it was a lot of information. I tried to get through it as thoroughly and as quickly as possible, but any questions?
Heidi has a questions on the chat.
Yeah, I see. Unfortunately, Distil Arts isn't in a position where we can sponsor visas. But I may, I'll have to research that and see. Maybe there is a possibility that I could do that. And the deadline for this year's work, there's no like hard deadline because everyone's project is slightly different. But I would like to get at least 3 or 4 of our manuscripts ready before the end of August for eventual publication and release in October. So if that's possible, we'll make that happen. But since some of you started at different times, some of you have been writing for a lot longer, we'll just sort of go based off of when you're done. Mauricio?
Hey, I just wanted to ask, like, how would you license, say, like, if your poem was like an audio track and say you wanted to perform it? I mean, it would have like different, I guess, medias if it were like in different licenses, correct? Like if you had a written poem that you recited and then it was recorded on a video, or like that would need its own license, like that video itself.
Yeah, technically. And if you are the copyright owner of the video, then yes. So
Okay.
each item, each one becomes its own intellectual property. And so each
Right.
one would be licensed in a different way. So the
So
written
video, prints,
Right.
any other form like a CD, audio, MP3,
Correct.
all require a different license. Okay.
Yeah, correct. And all are copyrightable. So you
Right.
can own the copyright of each one of them,
Okay.
and also license each one of them individually.
Right. Do you see any benefit between like copywriting individual poetry versus like poetic collections?
Honestly, I don't really see a benefit in that because it costs money to do individual pieces. But that said, for some people, there's, that works for them better. Um, it I guess comes down to your financial situation, your interest in, how you want to license the work as a body or as an individual work. Um, so yeah, I don't have a very direct answer for that, but you know, go to the copyright.gov website and read the differences, and that might help you understand which one works best for you as an individual.
Thanks, Luis. And one last question. If you do go the self-publishing route,
Yeah.
it's on you to copyright your work versus if a publishing company does it for you,
Right.
they're kind of doing that for you as well.
Yeah, publishers will do that for you on your behalf. Some of them will, some of them won't. It still ends up being kind of up to you to ensure that it does get done.
Okay.
In
Thank
all
you.
cases, that's better if you do it yourself.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're putting yourself in harm's way.
Yeah. Similar to like an ISBN, like
Yeah.
having, like you had recommended prior classes, just
Yeah.
having your own ISBNs
Yeah.
versus letting someone else, purchase them and
Right.
using them for you. Yeah.
Exactly. It comes down to, how granular of a level of control you want. But in the end, whether you are self publishing or you're working with a publisher, it's really on you to know what you're getting into and try to get as much information as you can to ensure that your work is protected. Because the last thing that you want is to have someone taking advantage of you because you didn't know. So, yeah, good questions, Mauricio. Thank you for asking. And yes, the slideshow will be available on Google Classroom, um, probably like in about 2 days or so, before the end of the week, along with the recording of today's session. Are there any last questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you so much for all that information. Most of it went above my head because it was a lot for me. But thank you. It was really thorough, and yeah, thanks again. I'm stuttering because there was times that it was you went in and out on my computer,
Yeah.
But I know that it's been recorded, and so I could always look it up again. But thanks again.
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure, Gustavo. The reason for all of this is because I never had anyone do this for me.
Wow.
I actually never, no, there never existed before in my knowledge to my awareness an organization that did any of this. I thought that going to college was going to provide this for me. And I was really wrong, especially when I got to Cal Arts. Like, I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest with you. I don't know why I thought that maybe an MFA program would teach me about the ins and outs of being an artist, but you know, you can't ultimately trust anyone other than yourself to, teach you about these things. Um, and all I can say is, like I'm doing this to teach you all, but it's still, I think, really important that you go to the websites that we're talking about, check them out, make sure that they work for you, make sure that you're tailoring all of this information to meet your needs, because everyone's needs are different. All artists practice things in a different way. You may find it overwhelming to be an independent artist, to be ultimately a business owner. um, but if you feel comfortable enough, you can do it. It's not right for me to say that because I did it you can do it. I recognize that we all have different circumstances, but that said, like, if you really want to, you're going to make it happen. You're going to do this because it's what's right for you, and I'm here for that. I'm here to support you. I'm here to support all of you, whoever's watching this, in I'm here to support you in reaching the goals that you want to achieve. So the plan for next week, since Mojda asked in the chat, is that really from here on out for the next couple of months, we're going to be spending every Wednesday doing breakout rooms. We will dedicate one more session a month from now to just the basic things that you need to know to prepare your manuscripts, because some of you are at that phase where you're ready to start turning in stuff, or getting close to it. So we're going to dedicate one session, like in about 4 weeks, to the ways in which I need to receive your work in order for me to turn it into a book. If you want to go that route through Distil Arts. Otherwise, we'll talk about how to do that for another publisher. But that's basically it. We're now going down the home stretch, as we say, in finalizing your work. So, I see Mauricio, you still have your hand up. I'm not sure if you have another question.
No.
Yeah. All right. Gustavo, you raised your hand also. There you go.
Yeah, that's Jerry. And
Yeah,
super brief.
Yeah, it's just very brief. I just want to thank Abraham and Luis both for this what you guys did today. I got a lot out of it. I took a lot of notes. I am interested in getting more involved with a lot of this, and I really appreciate all that information. I had no clue about any of it, and you really opened up my eyes to it, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you for sitting through it. Like I said, I know it's a lot of information. The handouts will be made available to you for you to print out at any point. And the video will also go live on YouTube in a couple of days. But yeah, if anyone else has any questions, Abraham, you have a last comment?
Quick, maybe you want to say the events are coming up. I think Nicholas' lecture and Tina's.
Same time.
Yeah. So we do have we have dueling events on June 4th. Well, one of them is a Distil Arts event. The other one is organized by Tina. But Tina and David Fallon will both be presenting their work at Barnes & Noble in Montclair on Saturday, June 4th. I don't remember the times. Tina, can you share that?
It'll be at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. There you go. And then representing the...
PM or AM?
2 p.m. Come on. And representing Distil Arts on Saturday, June 4th is going to be Nicolai Garcia, our own resident poet of Compton. He's going to be offering What's Going On, a community bridges workshop at Patria Coffee in Compton. So, it'll be a great opportunity to learn about ekphrasis and using music to inspire poetry. I'm actually very excited about that one. And Nikolai's workshop is going to be at 1 p.m. Till approximately 3 p.m.
Also,
yes,
Nikolai's name was not on the flyer.
Yeah, it's it's a Distil Arts workshop.
Okay.
But Nikolai
cool.
is the one that's leading it this time around. All right. So yeah, that's it for us this week, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you all very soon.